geography of the county, and then take a closer look at the Sinlahegan. So Okanogan County is the largest county in Washington. Nearly 58% of it is public land, which is mostly made up of national forest, state forest, state fish and wildlife, BLM. I think that's about it. And then 20% is the Caldwell Reservation, and then the rest of it is mostly private land. As you know, the west side is bordered by, it's the crest of the Cascade Mountain Range, and then you go all the way to the east side, you get into the Okanogan Highlands, and that just is a really good cross-section of habitat, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail, and that is what contributes to the high diversity of butterflies that we see here. Here's a map of it showing kind of the areas I was talking about. Got Sinlahegan right here, and we're in Tenasket. You got Okanogan Highlands are all out through here. This is the Cascade Range. You have a lot of high elevation and a lot of peaks and valleys. And then you get into the Cascade foothills in here. So you have this transition of species kind of as you go east. And then getting into species over here that occur more in Idaho and Montana. So this whole area through here is kind of a convergence zone between different groups of species. An aerial photo. So just a little bit more of an example of all the forested areas, and then you can see the Methow Valley through here. And then the Okanogan River. And these areas help, there's a lot of butterflies that occur in the Columbia Basin, and they will branch up, they'll follow these rivers, and so you'll find them in areas along the rivers up here. So you kind of follow that up. And that's also why we get monarchs up through here, because the monarchs are following the river up through Canada. So they'll come up into Oregon, they'll come up through Willamette Valley, they'll be on the eastern side too, going across the desert, and then they hit the Columbia River and they start following that north, and that takes them right up through here. And then from there, they'll branch off of that and follow the river up here, go up the creek and right up through the Sinlahegan Valley, and up through the Okanogan Valley into Canada. Different plant communities contribute to the diversity of butterflies. The Okanogan is composed of a wide variety of plant communities. Like I was just showing you, you have high elevation alpine habitat all the way down into desert shrub steppe type habitat. And you'll find different species in both of those places. There's lots of aspen groves, lots of natural springs. So instead of just being out in the middle of the desert with no water, this landscape is dotted by a lot of natural water, even when it's really dry in the summer. So that really helps contribute to the diversity of butterflies because they always have that water source. And you'll also get some species that only live in more marshy areas. So there are 124 species of butterflies found in this county. That's what we know is recorded so far. And to put that in context, there's 155 species recorded in the state. So Okanogan County hosts almost all of the species that you can find anywhere in Washington. Oregon has 163 species, I think, and Idaho is 171. Or I might have that backwards, but so a little bit more. But that's because Oregon, you're starting to get some of the California influence, the warmer climates to the south, and Idaho, you're getting more, you have that cross-section of the Great Basin, and then also getting up into Montana, Rocky Mountain kind of influence coming in there. Okay. So, Sinlahegan. This is a really, really special place to me. I first visited in 2003 just to see if I wanted to intern there or not. We came up to visit the intern that summer, who was the first one in the wildlife area. and pretty much fell in love with the place. Came back, spent the whole summer in 2004, and I've been coming back almost every year since then. Just really interested in the butterflies there. I love the area, it's beautiful. So that, as part of all of those trips, I wound up writing the book on the butterflies of the Sinlahican, and decided, since the Sinlahican has most of the species in the county, to just go ahead and cover everything in the county. So it's detailed information for the wildlife area, but little snapshots for everything else that you can find. The Sinlahican is the oldest wildlife area in the state, established in 1939. And 14,000 acres sounds like quite a bit, but compared to some of the other wildlife areas, it could be a little bit small, and it's a long, narrow valley. So you wouldn't really expect to see, this diversity of species. But it is right along that convergence zone I was talking about. So it's a big valley, and the west side is right at the foothills of the Cascades. So it's mostly forested, ponderosa pine, starting to get into Douglas fir. So you're getting the mountain butterflies coming down on that side. And then the east side of the valley is transitioning into that bitterbrush, sagebrush, steppe type habitat. So it's the seam between both of those types of habitat, and you get the butterflies likewise converging in that area. There's a couple species of blues that are rarely found together, and this is one of the places you can find them flying within the same place. And then you can see all the lakes in the area. There's a lot of springs in there. So it's just a really, really good butterfly hotspot. And just a little close up with the photo. You see the valley right up through here. So like I said, plants equal butterflies. Butterflies eat plants. So the more plant diversity you have, odds are you're going to have more butterfly diversity. Through several years of research and one really detailed plant survey, and we still keep adding to that, there's been over 560 species of plants documented on the wildlife area, including some rare species that are rarely found anywhere else in the state. That results in 91 butterfly species found on or within a mile of the wildlife area, which is 60% of the total species you can find in the whole state, in 14,000 acres. So we keep adding to it too. There's a couple species that we reported in the last couple years that we didn't have on the list. It was the first wildlife area to develop a long-term comprehensive plan for fire management, ecosystem restoration. And butterflies respond really well to that because it's making their plant habitat healthier. There's several plants that respond really, really well to fire, and then the butterflies in return will have boom years because the plants are doing so well. This research started by locating and collecting fire scars, analyzing the historic fire pattern over the years, and inventorying all the plants. That's how we first got the plant count that we keep adding to. The butterfly surveys were part of this, and numerous other biologists came and inventoried a lot of other plants in the area. After about 10 years of planning, the treatment started, and let's see, they thinned around 200 acres in fall of 2010 and spring of 2011, followed by prescribed burning of 535 acres by late April 2011, and then additional areas were done through 2014. So the next few slides, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the examples of why this is good. This here is an area that was prescribed burned 1 year before I took this photo. The lupin in the area was really abundant and bigger than lupin in unburned areas, and it was covered in butterflies. One example of lupin-dependent butterflies is the arrowhead blue, shown here, the dorsal ventral. You can identify them by these real long white arrowhead markings on their hind wing. Most other blue butterflies have kind of circular white and black spots on their hind wing. So this one is really easy to identify if you can see that underside. This area was prescribed burn across Blue Lake, and I took this picture in June of 2013, I think. Yep. And then the next day, I went out and inspected it. It was still smoking a little bit in a few areas, but there were butterflies flying out there. As you can see, the prescribed burning, they don't try to get to burn every square inch of the ground. They let it kind of burn naturally, and that really helps provide these refugia, these areas of unburned patchiness in the habitat where the butterflies can survive and other animals, and then recolonize the areas that have burned. So you can see, obviously there's a lot of green in here, and it burned off some of the grass, but there's a lot of the bushes that didn't burn. In here it got a little bit more up against the talus slope. So that day, I found a common wood nymph flying through there. These guys, their caterpillars feed on native bunch grasses like Idaho fescue, and that, of course, responds really well to fire. You burn it and it comes back like crazy and really robust and a lot more nutrients. Ochre ringlets, or common ringlets, these guys also feed on native bunch grasses. And these have two broods, so you could be burning kind of in between the broods when the adults are flying, and that might not impact them as well. And then the grass will come back the second time and provide nice fresh food for the caterpillars for the second brood. Lorquin's admirals, these, their caterpillars feed on alder and willow, which benefits from fire by releasing some of the competition, and then alder is nitrogen fixing, so that helps the area kind of recover after a disturbance as well. I found several of these flying there. They like to hang out around the edge of the lake. Pale crescents. This is kind of a cool little butterfly. They only have about a 1-inch wingspan, and in our area, their only larval host is Cirsium undulatum, the wavy leaf thistle. It's a native thistle, and it mostly grows on rock slopes, talus slopes, places like that. So those areas, this thistle benefits from the fire opening that up and providing more of a sunny open habitat for it to grow, and then this butterfly takes over. So this has only been recorded in 2 locations on the wildlife area. Dale first found it, and then I came back and found it in the same spot, and then we discovered it in this burned area. This day was the second discovery. So. And Oregon swallowtails, these guys aren't necessarily impacted by fire as much, but their larvae only feed on wild tarragon, Artemisia trunculus. That plant benefits from fire in that it opens up, provides a nice open meadow for it to grow in, and the plant can get like 2 to 5 feet tall, and the caterpillars, if they were high enough in that plant, when a very low intensity, fast moving fire came through, they might actually survive. The base of the plant is fairly woody, especially in mature plants, so they can survive just a really quick fire. If they do get burned off, they can spread through rhizomes, so they can recover pretty quickly like grass after a fire. And I found a few of these flying around out there. And I'll talk about those a little bit more later. And some other species that benefit from fire management and habitats. We've got fritillaries, so Coronis fritillary up here, and Great Spangled fritillary. These guys only use a variety of native violets as their host plant, their larval host plant, and violets benefit from fire, both releasing the area where they're growing, so kind of helping control the grasses that might choke them out. Some of the violets are more of a forest species, so they can withstand more shaded habitat, but they still don't do well if there's bushes and things weeding them out. So both light grazing and quick, fast-moving fires help release those and help maintain a healthy population in fertile areas. Then we've got a bunch of species of blues. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of butterflies that rely on lupin as larval host. There's two blues here. We've got waterfall blues, or most of what's in this picture, and a silvery blue here in the middle. Waterfall blues have more white around the spots on their hind wing, and silvery blues just have this one main row with a thin border of white around it. Both of those use lupin. Perseus dusky wing also uses lupin, which looks very similar to this. This is a different species I'll talk about in a second. Half-moon hair streaks. So if you count down through the number of species that use lupin, it's at least like 6 or 7 species. And another example that I've observed on the west side in the prairies around Fort Lewis, where I was doing some of my graduate research. The lupins on the side of the prairie that had been burned the year before were at least twice as tall and twice as big. There's massive bushes of lupin compared to the ones on the side of the road that had not been burned. And I was studying the Puget blue, which uses the lupin, and counting eggs and larvae. And I was finding on average twice the number of eggs and larvae on the lupin on the side that had been burned. And that's by square foot, so that's not counting like, for a whole plant that's this big, I'm gonna get double. I was counting per square foot. This is how many eggs and larvae I was getting per square foot on the other side. And then other research has found that they really respond well after burns like that. You don't want to burn a whole area if that's the only habitat, of course, because then they might struggle to recover. And you want to be mindful about what time of year you're doing that. But overall, it provides really, really healthy results for the butterflies. Okay, so then to finish up, we've got Cuvius dusky wing here in the middle, and California tortoiseshell caterpillars. Both of these, their larvae feed on ceanothus, buckbrush, snowbrush. That is a heavily fire-dependent plant. You practically have to burn the seeds to get them to germinate. And you may have seen a ton of California tortoiseshells last year, or the last 2 years. They had this massive explosion. So if you saw these kind of medium-sized dark butterflies that are mostly like dark orange, red, and black last year, probably was California tortoiseshells. They have these boom-bust cycles, so about every 10 years or so, there'll be this huge population explosion in a certain area. And the last couple of years, it was pretty much along the Cascades of Washington and Oregon. Other years, there'll be a big boom in Colorado. And so during those years, you'll start seeing these butterflies in places where normally you wouldn't find them, because usually they're up in the mountains where the ceanothus is. But people were seeing these on the west side in Seattle, places where their host plant doesn't grow. They're just showing up all over the place. And we've got bear's hair streak. These, their only larval host plant is bitterbrush. And while that can be killed by fires, fires also help make it healthier because it helps reduce that competition. And it is nectaring on buckwheat, Eriogonum species, which this little guy uses as its larval host plant. So those live in big open meadows and kind of interspersed in the sagebrush, and those will benefit from the fires kind of opening up the sagebrush and that kind of habitat.